just like that, we are back with our third Ruckus podcast, the RUCKCast of the year, and we'll talk to you in a minute. All right. So with me live today, in person in Phoenix, is Jim Palmer, my co-host, and we are here at the WLPC. And it actually feels kind of funny to be recording with you next to me, holding a microphone. I feel like a dork, but it's great. It's great to actually be back at this event. WLPC is like, what do we call it? Like Geek Summer Camp, except we're in February, so it's like Geek Spring Break kind of. Something like that. It's not quite as fun as DEF CON in the sense of like they call that Nerd Summer Camp. But it's great to be back. We're in Phoenix. It's actually great weather so far, knock on wood. It's been really nice during the day, usual desert chilliness at night, but it was great. So how are you, Jim?
I'm fine. I actually got in this morning, but you've been here for a couple of days.
I have been.
What have you been doing?
Been teaching the RCWA boot camp. I'm not going to cut that because I don't feel like editing, but the boot camp started yesterday. So Saturday, for those of you who are not going to be listening to this on Sunday, because I'm not posting it today. But they started Saturday. I flew in Friday, and then it went today. Yesterday, it'll go. We'll probably finish about a little bit more than halfway through tomorrow, about lunchtime, probably, give or take. And it's been going really well. It's my first time teaching it here. It's my first time teaching it at all. We've got 5 great partner customer people from all over the country. It's been pretty good so far.
You know, it's funny because we were just talking about how do you describe WLPC, and it's funny, we've done episodes about it, but I was talking to my Uber driver this morning as he was bringing me in from the airport, and he was like, oh, a tech conference. And I was like, yeah, I said, but it's unlike any other tech conference because it's not really a tech conference. I was like, it's just a bunch of people who are really passionate about Wi-Fi who all get together and then put on a conference for ourselves so that we can learn about more Wi-Fi stuff. I was like, it's really kind of interesting. And, you know, and it's, you know, today's just been my first day. I spent most of the day, actually I spent all of the day prepping for my deep dive that I'm going to be teaching starting Tuesday. So I got some more prep work to do tomorrow, but it's been interesting to catch up with everybody. And there's a lot of, we had dinner tonight with a gentleman. I think we can say his name.
Sure. Will
Jones. He's, if you know Will, then you know Will, and if you don't, then you have no idea who Will is. But it was fun to catch up with him. I haven't seen Will. I think the last time I saw Will was in Tenerife in Ekahau Masters in 2018. If that tells you, but it's funny because I haven't seen him in 5 years, and yet, you know, we picked up just like we had seen each other, you know, the other night. So it was really fun to have dinner with all these guys, and there was a good mix of people at dinner tonight. So it was fun to catch up with everybody.
Indeed. I mean, it's one of those things where, especially in the last couple of years with COVID doing what it did to travel and events, there are definitely some people you see here that you only see here. And
yes.
So for some of us, it's once a year for a few days, which makes it's great, but it's so kind of, it's a bummer when you leave because some of these people you're not going to see again until February of next year if you get to come.
Yes. Because
it's no slam dunk that everybody comes every year because life happens. Sometimes companies don't let you go, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really great. But the nice thing is, like, you walk into the conference room lobby on, you know, for me it was Friday night. For you it was this morning. For some of those listening, it'll be Monday night when they register for the main conference. And it's the first time you've seen some of these people in months, if not a year. And this year it's a little earlier, so it's about 50 weeks for some of these people. And it's like you never left.
Yeah.
It is really great. It's kind of like putting on that old comfortable pair of shoes. It just feels right. Everybody kind of picks up. And there's always going to be talk, and this is not a Ruckus specific part of it, but there's always going to be talk about newbies to the environment. And sometimes it's hard to fit in if you're new, but if you're a little bit extroverted, and you just kind of squeeze your way into some of those circles, you fit right in. This is my 4th, and it feels like I've been here forever.
And, you know, the funny thing is I'm actually an introvert, but I've decided this year that I am going to be very, very extrovert. And I have been meeting and chatting with a bunch of people, and it's been really fun. And I was talking to somebody, I said, the thing that I like about, I was talking to Raymond Hendricks and Troy Martin at lunch today, which is interesting when you just sit down and you end up talking to some of these people and you're like, wow, and we were talking about, we were talking about the nice thing about WLPC is you get to crowdsource your problems.
Yes.
And so there's only so many problems that we can come up with. And yet when you sit down at lunch, it's like, talking to Troy Martin, and he's like, my problem with my IoT stuff, which we recorded the episode about, was he's like, a lot of these industrial control networks need their IoT network on an air gap network. So he's like, can you take the IoT radios in a Ruckus AP and put it out the second Ethernet port so you can run a second cable to a second switch so that you can air gap the industrial control systems that are running on IoT? And I was like, ooh, that's a good problem.
That's probably a use case that hasn't been thought of yet, but that's interesting.
But it's interesting to come to WLPC because we get to have these conversations.
Yes.
And that was my lunch conversation. And then the dinner conversation is what I actually want to talk about tonight.
Sure. And I was going to say, just to hit on the lunch real quick before we dive into the deep part of dinner, that was a point I stressed with. So all 5 of my RCWA attendees are first timers.
Nice.
Which is actually kind of nice. In a way, it would have been neat if I had somebody that had been here before. Just to have a little bit of flavor, but they're all new. And that's sort of one of the reasons why we pushed to do RCWA here. It's a newer course. I think the deck's been around a couple of years, but we're making a renewed effort to get out and train people.
Well, it was a new deck when COVID started.
Well, yes.
So but the in-person stuff was a little harder.
But the push to do this is really, in the last few months, I guess, it became a really, I don't want to say it's a priority necessarily, but it definitely became something of a push. And we definitely wanted to do it because Ruckus has never, to my knowledge, done a boot camp at any WLPC, and so it's a really big honor. We are, and I can toot my own horn because it's our show. We are the only vendor that, to my knowledge, unless I'm forgetting somebody, we're the only vendor this year teaching a boot camp. There were others to be voted on, but we're the only one that got voted in to do a boot camp. Like vendor doing the vendor boot camp.
Yes.
There are other vendor sessions, not vendor sessions per se, but vendor training specific to a particular vendor, but they're not done by that vendor. They're being done by a third party. So that's kind of cool, and people have made it a point to kind of point that out. But I made a point to your point, a lot of points here, with the crowdsourcing, right? You bring your experience to the table, and you're sitting at a lunch table, and Jim, you pointed it out. Looking around the lunch table, I surveyed it before I came back and grabbed some soda to keep running in the class. There's Jim sitting with UC Kivianimi from Hamina. There were, I had Keith Parsons sitting with other people, and just people can grab people's ears, and you share the war stories of what you've done over your deployments, and you're going to find a couple things. One, a lot of people have the same types of experiences, but a lot of people have different experiences. And I told the guys in class today that, there's many ways to skin the cat. And I'm allowed to pick on cats because we're a dog company. I said that in class too. But you're going to find out that like how I do something is different than how Jim does something, but both work for us. And maybe there's a better way to do it, or maybe there's a more correct way to do it. But if it works and it works for you, but you get to share, then you're going to go home and say, oh, wait a minute. Bill from class did it this way, and I didn't do that, and I didn't know that. I'm going to go try that. I've had conversations here from years past where I didn't know how to do something, or I didn't know that something I had could do what I needed to do because I just didn't know who to ask.
Yeah.
And sometimes, I'll be honest, we are a vendor podcast, but sometimes the vendor people don't even know how some of these things can be pushed to the max. And so it's good to hear what your customers are doing or what other users of the hardware are doing. And so that's really the benefit of it. But then we devolved into dinner, which got into some really fun stuff. So I'm gonna tee it up for us a little bit. So full disclosure, the hotel Wi-Fi is Ruckus. We had an interesting story last year, which we can tell if we feel like it, but that wasn't where we went with this year. So this actually ties into, there was a post on Twitter, I think last week or the week before, that really got our dander up. And Jim, I'll let you kind of run with it from there.
So again, Ruckus is found in a lot of different hospitality, a lot of hotels, very big in hotels. And I've seen hotels that have been done very, very well. I've seen hotels that have done not so well. And the topic of discussion tonight at dinner with a bunch of different people from a lot of different verticals. And we even had one competitor sitting with us, which was fun. It's always fun here when you get to kind of relax with your competitors. But the topic of conversation was turned to system defaults.
Yes.
Because what was noted, and what was the same thing that came up on Twitter. And the conversation actually had nothing to do with anything we saw on Twitter. So one didn't start the other. It was two independent conversations, but it was all about channel fly, and people would be like, "Oh, you can tell it's channel fly," which is a Ruckus thing, because they use channels 1, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9. It's like, oh, well, that's channel fly. So it's a Ruckus thing. And it was interesting because that's what got our dander up. And we talked about this, amongst ourselves earlier, because it's like, that's not channel fly. And so at dinner tonight, when that topic came up, and you and I looked at each other, and we started to say, but what I found interesting was the other people at the table who are not Ruckus people,
no affiliation whatsoever.
They said the exact same thing at the exact same time. And we all said, it's not channel fly. It's the configuration. Yes. It's the default configurations, or in some cases, they go back in and they change the default configurations to these types of automatic radio or RF engineer in a box type of features that are in every major controller, and they change them wrong.
Correct. And the social media post was specifically actually about, I believe, an airport that was using Ruckus. And again, it had like all the channels under 2.4 in the rainbow, maybe.
Yes.
And the nice thing, to your point, was it wasn't a bash Ruckus session, because we wouldn't have let them do it. Right. We were the two biggest guys there, so we could have taken them. But no vendor-on-vendor violence was encouraged or had. It was about, there's a common thread, and it wasn't that it was Ruckus or that it was channel fly. It just so happened that it was Ruckus and channel fly. Channel fly or any other algorithm that any other vendor puts out is not going to prevent a bad deployment from being a bad deployment. And the common thread in any of that is layer 8.
Yes. Okay. And that's something that I think I've talked about in the past with other people. And it's nice when you can come to an event like WLPC and you're talking to these people, because they're not. But when they confirm what we say amongst ourselves, because we're like, it's not channel fly. These are non-Ruckus people. These are people that work for competitors. They all across the board, everybody said it's not channel fly. Now, the problem that we have is because Ruckus is so big in hospitality and everybody gets together at hotels, it's an easy target. It's an easy thing to pick on, because it's like, if you don't set your configurations correctly, if you don't follow specific guidelines, the controllers, and it's not just a Ruckus thing, every vendor controller will allow you to misconfigure or configure your radio settings incorrectly.
Sure. There's no well, I'm not going to be PC. There's no idiot proof button on the system. I mean, I had previous life, past vendor, I'm not going to name the names. It wasn't me that did it. It was, one of our offices did it. They had their controller. They didn't want to let anybody touch it. They built it the way they did it, and it was effectively, they made it single channel architecture. Yeah. When we went down and did a survey, they're like, I don't understand why we can't roam. Nothing works. And you do a survey, and literally every channel, or every AP was on channel 36. Yeah. So as soon as they're like, oh, but it's got, the I'm not going to name the brand name of the device, but they didn't have the software enabled to do the auto planning that they thought was there. Like, they knew it was part of the platform, but they didn't turn it on. They never bothered to look at turning it on, and because it wasn't turned on, everything was on channel 36, and the performance sucked. As soon as you hit the right button and gave it time to do its optimization, because all of these platforms need to run an hour, 2 hours, 24 hours to settle down, it was fine. It was literally night and day difference. And so now I understand I've only been here 2 years, and you've got a little bit more time on me, and there's some people that have been out there that have been here for forever. In earlier versions of Channel Fly, the defaults were not set to 1, 6, and 11.
See, again, but it's not a Channel Fly thing.
Well, okay, it's not Channel Fly, but our controllers, the defaults were.
The radio configurations in the controllers had all of the 2.4 channels enabled.
Yes.
But here's the thing, and so this is a Ruckus thing. We'll own it. But every other vendor that I've ever worked with and I've ever seen, and I've looked at almost all of them, at least the major ones, they all have different types of default radio configurations within their platforms that you look at and you go, that is not a good setting. And so I think this kind of ties back to what you're doing here this weekend before the main conference starts. So the boot camps are on the weekends and then the main conference is in the week. And it comes back to what John's doing here, which is this idea that as engineers, we need to constantly train. We need to constantly learn and figure out. It's like, because there are so many different things that you can adjust within Wi-Fi that if either you don't adjust it or you adjust it wrong, ends up with networks that don't perform as well as they could. And
Sure.
so training, reading the manuals, doing all that kind of stuff is really imperative, because in a couple of days, and I found out today that WLPC for this week is going to have 350 attendees. They sold out.
Biggest one yet.
The biggest one yet. They sold out completely. And the biggest one yet by about not a whole lot. I think the one before it was 330, 335. So it's biggest, but
it's also worth mentioning, this is the first year that they couldn't do an overflow.
Yes.
So just for the record, to set the table, this is the week before the Super Bowl. And the conference organizer made the misguided decision that this was a good week to avoid the Super Bowl, when the reality is we're all going to be flying home on Thursday, when most of the rest of the fans are going to be flying into town, and there already were. I mean, I flew out on Friday, and there were already Eagles fans.
Yeah.
Go Birds. Sorry, Bart. That were on their way out. So it's going to be a crazy week. We're not really there by the epicenter, but it's a crazy busy week, and he didn't have the ability, as he has in years past. That's how we got to the 330 number a couple of years ago, to allow people to go over the 300. 300 had always been his target. We moved to a different hotel, but it's still big.
It's big. And so, but of the 350 people that come to the Wi-Fi spring break camp, whatever we're calling it, of the 350 people, you're going to find that 100% of the people here, hopefully, if not at the beginning of the time, by the end of the week, is going to say, we have to configure our networks to make them work the way that we want them to work.
Yes.
Because if you simply turn on, you fire up your box. I mean, one of the stories that came out at dinner tonight was about a hotel, a Ruckus network in the Middle East, that was using a country code of the United States. And I don't know, we might have to edit this later to cut that out, because it's
we didn't say where, we just said the Middle East.
Middle East, okay. So, but the conversation, because everybody looked at us and they're like, "What are you guys doing?" And it's like, look,
It's the default.
It tells you to set the country code.
Yes.
It's like, what country? It's not, and it's like, if you don't go change that to the country code of where you're actually where your APs are at, then yes, the controllers will let you do that.
Yes, and it reminds me in general of Wi-Fi, and I remember, Keith likes to say it in the sense of
I know what you're about to say.
People say if it's bad but it works, that's what Wi-Fi is supposed to be. It's designed for battlefield situations where it's resilient. Doesn't matter if it's working at 2 megasecond, it's working.
Wi-Fi is designed to work poorly.
Yes. And the defaults will work, and this goes for almost any vendor. You can just build it straight out of the box, quick and dirty being the key word,
yeah.
and it'll work. But it won't necessarily work well. And so one of the things, and we talked about this a little bit on the walk back from dinner, so ChannelFly, and this, again, predates me, used to, like you said, not even ChannelFly, but the channel plans used to let you, by default, have everything on. And so knowing, and now if you go into, we were working on a 611 controller in the class, and I had a 522 controller that we were looking at, 1, 6, and 11 are the only ones that are highlighted. So where I'm going back with this is not only that you need the training, iron sharpens iron, you got to keep sharp. There's 2 points here. One is that those locations that they're talking about are old, which means they haven't had proper care and feeding. And somebody went and did that, and maybe they're smarter now, maybe they know better, and they didn't go back and fix it. But, and we say this every year when we hear, somebody always says it, every one of us has a design. Every one of us has a deployment that they will look back now, 5, 6, 7 years, 6 months, whatever, after they did it and go, I have no idea what I was thinking.
Yes.
But it's the evolution of ourselves as engineers, and that's an event like this facilitates that. I'm definitely at least a little bit smarter than I was in 2017. Maybe.
Well, and I'm doing a presentation Tuesday, and I actually talk about that. And I talk about the fact that we do look back and we look at some of the stuff that we've done in the past, and you literally just kind of go, they really paid me to do that. What were they thinking? They would have. what? Oh my, and that's just how it is, because we do learn. And so
hopefully
we learn, and I say that in my talk is and coming to events like this and listening to podcasts and taking training and all these other things. The idea is that you're never going to know everything. Just like you were talking about in your class with, there are certain things when you take a class, and it's not just you, I've taken all of the classes, and every single one of my instructors that has been worth anything has said at one point is they'll be like, there are people in this classroom that will know specific segments or certain segments of this material better than I am.
Yes.
And the best instructors will learn actually more from the class than the students, because they listen to all of the feedback. But that's how we get better.
Yes. I mean, I did that all of class. I mean, and full disclosure, Jim and I have been talking about this for quite a few months, just prepping, just the event in general. But he knew, that he was very helpful with me, but with the RCWA deck and kind of getting a handle on it. And, it's the general material for those interested in RCWAs. We're going to go all over the map. It's available on our training site. It's available on the internet. I mean, if you just Google RCWA nutshell training guide or something to that effect, it will come up to the Ruckus training site.
How about we put
if I actually start doing podcast show notes, I will put the link in the description.
Put the link. Yeah, we should learn.
But so the nice thing with that is that anybody can read that. And I said this to the class either today or yesterday, and I stressed, I was part of the reason why I wanted to do this, part of the reason we wanted to do this, and it wasn't just me, there were multiple people behind this effort, was to get Ruckus here to teach, but it was also to get the partners that wanted and needed to do RCWA exposed to WLPC, because at the end of the day, people that don't go to WLPC, they watch it from afar. You can watch the videos. Jim's 55-minute session will be up on YouTube in approximately 2.5 weeks or so, sometimes a little bit faster, sometimes a little bit longer. They're really good about getting it turned around. You can watch all the videos. Every video from every WLPC is on YouTube to be watched. If that's all you do, you miss out on the conference.
That's not the reason to come to WLPC.
No. And for those thinking, it's a conference, it's a big party. Do we have fun? Yes, we have fun. But I mean, literally, so the boot camp starts at 8:30. I mean, it's now for us, it's 10:30.
Yeah.
And we're recording a podcast. We're doing work. And when we're going to finish this, I've got more work to do. Again, we're going to go 8:30 till probably about the same time tomorrow night, between wrapping up the boot camps, getting ready for the deep dives, and the main conference. And then Tuesday, Wednesday, it's basically going to be a 12+ hour day between the main session, the deep dive for Jim, and then Tuesday night we've got the vendor session. So it's a very, very busy week, but it's iron sharpens iron. You got all these shoulder conversations in the hallways and walking by and seeing people, and it's great. So it's just you have to come and experience, and I'm grateful that we had 5. I think it's actually 4 partners and 1 customer that snuck in there that are able to be here. At the end of the day, they're all customers and they're really nice guys. I'm grateful that they're here because they're all newbies, and it's 5 people that had otherwise not been here. Anybody can try to get an RCW class, and I'm pretty sure Todd and his crew in the training side will work something out to get an on-site trainer. Maybe. I'm not trying to promise Todd does anything that Todd doesn't do. Sorry, Todd. But I mean, anybody can have a class in the office for their team. And let's be honest, some teams aren't big enough that you need to bring in a trainer in for 1 or 2 people. But getting out to these events, it's the cross-pollinization at the end of the day. And anybody that's 100% hardcore Ruckus fanboy, I'm sorry, cover your ears, but there are other solutions out there, and it's important for all of us to know about them. For us as vendors, we know what we're competing against, and it helps us kind of innovate and stay sharp. But for the customers, it lets them understand what works and how things work, and it gives them new ideas. I mean, there's a ton of new ideas. We've been talking about it. You mentioned some. We don't necessarily have to mention them on the recording if you don't want to, but there's things that our stuff can do. I mean, I had it in the class. There were things that our controller does that people in my class didn't know. And to me, I took it for granted. Talking about, for example, the fact that depending on the version of the controller, you can have multiple zones with multiple firmware.
That's one of my favorite features, and I don't think we talk about it enough.
We don't. And I mean, I dropped that knowledge gumdrop yesterday, and I had a couple of people go, "Really? You can do that?" And the other question was, why would you do that? And I'm like, well, if you're running newer APs and you've got a zone that's stable, run the new firmware on the zone that you just built for that new AP, so you don't break the other stuff.
That's the biggest thing. And I run multiple firmware versions in my lab at my house because I have people that ask me questions, and it's always like, and the funny thing is, and I actually see this a lot more with Ruckus than I see with anybody else, is they go, oh, I have an 802.11n AP that's now 14 years old, and they're like, and it's awesome and it works great. And they're like, and we're not ready to upgrade. And they're like, but when we can't upgrade our whole fleet. Now, other competitors, other people, you end up having to get new controllers with new code. And so you end up with, one area of your network that is running on one set of controllers, and then you have another, but then you have to license two sets of controllers. And if you want any redundancy, now you're licensing a bunch of sets and it gets really, really convoluted. And so at my house, and I wrote a blog post about this, I run 3 different versions on 3 different zones, so that when people call me up and they go, hey, I have a ZoneFlex 7982, which is a 3x3 802.11n AP, and they're like, and I'm having problems with this one specific thing. I have one of those at my house. I plug it in. I have some rules set up, and it goes, oh, this AP actually gets, I have some DHCP zones. And so it's like, oh, this AP gets this IP address. And when that IP address registers on my controller, on my smart zone, my virtual smart zone, it says, oh yeah, I'm going to drop you into this zone right here, which is running 3.6. But if I plug in an R600, it'll get a different version. And if I plug in an R550, it gets a different version. If I, the new 6 gigahertz, it's going to need a new version.
Yes.
But I can do it all on one controller, and I don't have to license all these different controllers. I don't have to license 4 controllers. I have one controller with one set of licenses, and I swap my APs in and out as I need to be able to support the customers that call me, whether it's through their sales engineers or whether it's meeting people here. I was helping Lariana. She's a partner from Brazil, and she's like, hey, I got some 7982s running at a university in Brazil, and I need some help. And I was like, well, let me fire them up. And so I fired them up, and we were able to do stuff like that. But it's the training, and it's the learning and better understanding the features and the configurations of the hardware that you're using that I really want to try to harp on and focus as much. I mean, we've kind of rambled all over the map because
that's what we do.
We're fanboys of this type of stuff, and we get on wild tangents. And we had healthcare conversations at dinner because one of the guys sitting with us happens to be in healthcare. He does medical type devices, and so that's just a fascinating thing for all of us. And so, and the guy is unbelievably smart, and he sits there and has dinner. He sat right next to me, right off my arm. And it was very interesting to have those conversations and talk about all this stuff. And it's funny because it always comes back to the same thing.
And what's that?
Wi-Fi does not work because of us. Wi-Fi works in spite of us.
It's true. It's true.
We sometimes think that we're doing really, really great things, and then all of a sudden you look back and you go, "Wow, I was so wrong." It's like I'm sure glad I don't think. It's like, and that's where it comes down to.
And I think this might have been actually when you were straggling behind, but we had this conversation I think with Will, and it's one of those things where. And maybe you were right there, but we had so many different conversations going on at dinner. It was crazy, and you really had to be there, but it wouldn't have been a good recording because we would have had to delete a lot of it. But the conversation was made that some of these are maybe because we don't know what we're doing and we're winging it. And let's be honest, we were all at that point in our career where maybe you didn't have a good mentor or whatever. But he and I were frank. I mean, sometimes it's quick and dirty.
Yes.
You're literally building it because you've got like 2 hours, there's a customer deadline, something's going live, the event or whatever, and it's not going to be perfect, and there's like 1,000,001 rules that you're breaking or ignoring or boxes that probably should be checked, but if you don't check them because all the time, it'll work. No matter what, it'll work, and that's the main goal. Is it'll work. It'll be good enough to get the job done, and then you'll just be like, "Whew, thank God, I got it done. It's over and done with, and we can move on to the next one." Because now we don't always get the time. Sometimes these networks take months to build and tune, and sometimes you get hours or less.
But the other interesting thing, and again, it goes back to the training and the understanding part, is once you know the rules, once you understand why the rules, you then know when to break the rules and how you can break the rules. So there are times when, this goes back to the, it's not channel flight problem, the 1, 6, and 11. Sometimes you might not be able to do that. There could be times when it makes sense. Some of the other regulatory domains, they do a 1, 5, 9, 12 or something. I mean,
12 is in play for Europe, and then what's it, 13 or 14 is in
Japan.
So,
and so all of a sudden you end up in these situations where it's like, when can I break the rules? Well, you know what? There are times when, and I was actually talking about this with somebody else, this morning about understanding, it's like, oh, when do I break the rules and how can I break the rules? And it's like all of a sudden, what we were talking about was the difference between rogue APs and unknown neighbor APs. And it's like, if you have an unknown neighbor AP that is just hammering on one of the 2.4 channels because they said, oh, this is how I'm going to configure my network, and they put all of theirs on, channel 2, then all of a sudden it's like, well, you might have to break the 1, 6, and 11 rule, because you now have a situation that, is outside the norm. And so it's like, now I know how to break the rule. I know when to break the rule. I know how to break the rule, because I've done all the learning. I've done all the training. I've watched the videos. I've come to conferences. I've had these conversations at night. My very first year at WLPC, I was talking with one of the guys at like 12:30 in the morning about .1x. It's like, that's how nerdy it is.
That's not a conversation I want to be having at 12:30 in the morning unless I'm on a break fix kind of bridge.
No, it's just, but that's what happens at WLPC.
It really is. Time flies. It does fly.
Yeah.
And you don't realize what, you can get into, and you can go down some really crazy rabbit holes. But it is, I mean, and you're in the room with the right people to have these conversations with, and you're going to get a lot of different opinions.
And to your point, though, you're not going to see these people face to face for possibly, for me and Will, it's been 5 years.
Yeah.
Me and Brian, I think I saw Brian last year.
Yeah.
That was the last, and yet I see Brian, and we're just, go up, give each other a hug, and then we start jumping right in, just like it was, last year was
like
last week.
Yeah.
And so that's the value of the learning. That's the value in understanding this stuff. And so that's the point.
The other part of it too, and I'm going to have to, because I think maybe we have this sponsorship with Sam. We have to do this like once an episode. It does depend, and you mentioned it, and the different. It's birds of a feather, and Keith used to have the birds of a feather sessions where you could have like tables at lunch during the main conference where like people that did education would sit together, or people that did hospitality would sit together, so you could share, talk shop. But here's the other part of it, and my class is a good example of it, and the conference in general is a great example. I'm a service provider SE. I have some experience with customer deployments dealing with hospitality and MBU space because I've got people that are in the managed space in that realm that I support. But most of mine is service provider, just general service provider. So I do a lot of outdoor Wi-Fi, for example. I've got people in I've got a gentleman in my class that's running a university. I've got another guy who's got experience doing university MDU space. I've got a couple guys that are doing hospitality, and the fifth guy does just about anything, whatever they do, Ruckus. So it's all over the map, and he's doing like some high-end homes and stuff like that. So it's a mix of experience, and what I need to do as a service provider in the outdoor space is not necessarily what the hospitality space is going to use. Different APs, different gear, different experiences, and sometimes, and this is true of almost a lot, well, not almost everything, but there's a lot of different disciplines that unless somebody gives you a chance or you talk to somebody, you might never know about why they do it a certain way. And I'm not going to get into any specific rules because I don't have any good specific examples at 10:38 at night on Sunday, but you get exposed to that, and so there's a couple good things about it, right? It's just a general experience. You're learning from other people that have done it, so that you don't necessarily have to make the same mistakes that they did. But it's just it's learning. It helps you grow, and who knows? Maybe there's some experience out there that you hear about that you're like, you know what? I'm enjoying what I'm doing, but I want to have exposure to something else. And sort of bring that home. Like I started 2017, I was on the other side. I was a customer, not of Ruckus, but I was a customer coming here to learn, and I had the good fortune, maybe it's good fortune, maybe it's bad, of meeting Daryl, our coworker Daryl, who may or may not be a guest on here from time to time, and eventually that's how I came to be came to be part of Ruckus. So you never know what's going to happen to WLPC.
Yeah, and you said something I I find interesting because I think in the past it was much more true than it is today. You're talking about the birds of the feather, which I thought was really cool. But it's like, just because I don't work in K through 12 or higher ed, why don't I get to be part of those stories? Why don't I get to talk about that stuff? Because I'll tell you, I learned the most when I'm talking to people who specialize in things that I don't really do. Because what I end up learning is, it's like, as much as we like to think that all of this stuff differs, and it's like, this is one type of area, and this is a vertical, and this is a different vertical, and this is a different vertical. What I've learned is that we all end up fighting the same problem, because we're all doing Wi-Fi.
We just call it something different. And the use cases and the business drivers are different, but the technology doesn't change very much. And so what I end up learning, like when I talk to K-12, people who specialize in K-12, is they're like, this is the problem that we have in K-12, and this is how we solve it. And I go, I was talking to somebody who was doing retail, and they were having this problem. And it turns out that your solution for your problem in K-12 would actually solve their problem too. Maybe not in the way that you think it, in your same way, but the technical solution that you have with that problem is can be applied to other verticals, to other things like that. 100%.
And so it's the learning, it's the education, it's that whole, it's not channel fly that gives us the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Channel fly is just simply doing what it does best, but we have to tell it what we want it to do for our networks. And so it's like, it used to work like here, but in talking to people, you go, we need to modify it. We need to change it. Well, why do you need to modify it? And why did you change it? I changed it because this is the problem I was having. That problem I'm also having in, higher ed. I'm having in manufacturing. I'm having in healthcare. I'm having in all these things where, and that's what's fun talking to the healthcare guy that we had dinner with, is it's like, he has some really crazy stories. But when you actually start talking to him and sit him down, you realize a lot of the problems that he has can be, extrapolated and applied to other verticals. And it's like, and the way that they solve things in healthcare is wholly different because of what they're dealing with. And so you can take those lessons that he's learned there and you go, wow, I can apply this to something else, and I can turn out a better product for my end customer.
Yeah. And it really, and again, you hit the nail on the head there. And I think that's the ultimate, not the ultimate, but an ultimate benefit of coming here and being exposed to the different groups. Because it's not like square peg round hole. It's, you just, again, like you said, and I it made me think of something with CloudPath. We market that, or we target that to like MDU and hospitality, maybe not hospitality so much, but like MDU and thinking like a college dorm environment. And I had a conversation with Christopher Mohammed, and we'll have him on at some point in the future. But I had a past life where I supported a large company that had a lot of different business units and a lot of different, very unique circumstances. And while they weren't MDUs in that particular sense, a lot of what we could have used there to fix that is what CloudPath addresses. Mm-hmm. Not the target market, not necessarily the core, the sweet spot of it, but absolutely with a little bit of finesse, it's absolutely useful for that as well. And so, at the end of the day, the RF is the same and the methodology is the same, but, the customers and how they're talking about it is a little bit different. But it's great to hear the differing perspectives, getting the differing opinions. And fortunately, tonight we had a lot of all sorts of all over the map conversations, and nobody was hurt. Nobody was hurt. And it was great. It truly was. And I think we both actually looked at each other when it came up, because I figured it was an opportunity that everybody was going to just tee off on us. And, we were either going to go find someplace else to eat, or we were going to, it was going to be vendor on vendor violence. But, it's true. At the end of the day, all the AI and ML and all the different bells and whistles and nerd knobs will never save anybody, any vendor at all, from somebody not knowing what they're doing, mm-hmm. and also not properly caring and feeding for the network. Because anybody looking at that overtime that does surveys and stuff would have gone and said, "Wait a minute, I'm using overlapping channels in 2.4. I need to fix that." Not to mention the fact that you probably shouldn't be focused on using 2.4 in an airport or a hospitality space unless you absolutely have to in 2023, because 2.4 is kind of, well, I'll say something controversial. 2.4 is dead. Not really, but we can never have enough. We can never have enough spectrum. I had to go there. Come on, this is the conference to go there, right? This is somebody else is going to say we're just saying on a podcast, but no. The reality though is there's a litany of reasons. I mean, and it depends. Going back to right, there could have been a very valid reason why, and you hit on one with the 2.4 and the noisy neighbors and stuff. There could have been a very valid reason why, for whatever reason, that they were using all of those channels, even though most of us in the Wi-Fi space would never know what those good reasons were. But it does depend, because there could have been some mitigating factor other than they didn't know what they were doing that made them do that.
The one thing that I've been pretty proud about the Wi-Fi community over the past couple of years is, for the longest time, there was a focus on what was known as bad fi. And there was a Twitter thing, and everything was about bad fi. And it's run by a friend of mine, a friend of ours. He lives not too far from me, so I see him a lot more than you do.
Probably.
But we've really calmed down on the bad fi stuff.
Well, I think somebody called him out on it, actually,
well, it was a question of, until you know why they did something. It's like, why did they mount that AP like a clock on the wall?
Yeah.
Because that, for the longest time, you'd see that, you go bad fi.
Yeah, some of them were definitely very bad. There was no debating about it. But some of them were.
But some of them, it was like, well, but what if maybe that's what they wanted. Maybe they weren't really worried about covering the way that we thought they were trying to cover. What if the purpose of that thing mounted on the wall was really because they wanted the RF to cover something totally different? So
sure.
it's like until you understand why somebody did something, and then if you go, oh, well, that's because it makes it look, the AP looks nice hanging on the wall.
Yeah, I don't mind ripping on people when you're showing like the zip tied ones and stuff like that.
Not even the zip tie ones. I've zip tied APs in places.
But when you know what I mean. There's definitely examples that was like clearly bad fi, but it was getting to the point where I think people were. Well, what's worse about it and I made this comment in class. It's a small community. At the end of the day, everybody figures out who did the design. Everybody's going to figure out. Maybe not everybody, but a lot of the times you're going to figure out who owned that mistake.
Well, but the other thing is it goes back to what we talked about a little bit ago. About, we look back on stuff that we've done in the past and go, oh my goodness, I can't believe they let me do that. I can't believe that somebody looked at that and said, that's good enough, we're going to pay them for that, because it's so bad. And so by calling this stuff out, by saying it's bad fi, we're shaming people that we should be trying to help. Mm-hmm. We also don't know why it was done. And again, I think it's not that bad fi doesn't exist, because it does.
No, yeah.
It's that we need to do better. And so that's actually something I'm proud of, is the fact that we don't...
It's the constructive criticism. It's the good feedback.
But on social media, it was never constructive criticism on social media.
They put them on blast. So, to be honest and blunt, it was savage to a point.
It was.
And the thing that people forget, and again, it came up in classes, we have a section on design and deployment. Mm-hmm. You and I could design it perfectly in whatever tool we're using to design it. But unless we're the ones physically deploying it, it's our design. It might be our property that we manage, but at the end of the day, we're largely at the mercy of, an integrator or somebody else that's deploying it. Maybe it's an electrician, and maybe where we designed it, we didn't know there was an access issue and they couldn't run the cable, and the closest they could do to where we put it was the wall. I would have never allowed a wall mount, but you've got a million different reasons,
and we could spend hours talking about that. Yeah. So I don't want to do that, but. I still want to try to bring this back, and we're going to wrap this up here.
Sure.
About the idea that, I was very happy that at dinner tonight, as we were talking about that one location that had all the crazy 2.4 channels, and they were like, it was a Ruckus network. But what I liked is that he didn't call it out saying, I knew it was a Ruckus network because the channel configurations were all wrong. He was like, I looked. It was a Ruckus AP, because you can see it in the beacon frames. Mm-hmm. Wi-Fi Explorer Pro will tell you this is a Ruckus AP. Sure. And he's like, it was Ruckus, and it was on all these crazy channels, and you and I expected to go.
I was expecting to get beaten.
We were gonna. It was like a throwdown. We were gonna do a cage match to the death in there, and it was. I was super happy that everybody at the table said, it's not a channel fly issue.
And I think
it's not. And channel fly gets a really, really bad name.
It wasn't perfect at the beginning, but none of them were.
But more importantly, channel fly is not the problem. And so I was really happy when we were at dinner tonight that everybody said that, and I respected everybody that was at that table, and all of them said it's not a channel fly issue. It's not a problem with channel fly. Channel fly gets a bad rap because of it, but it's not channel fly. It's because somebody who was configuring it either didn't know, wasn't sure, any number of reasons. But it was like the problem is they didn't do the proper care and feeding. They didn't go back and validate. They don't check their networks after it's done. And it's like, and so it was very nice and refreshing to be here at dinner and have a group of people who focus on pretty much all the vendors across the board, and some customers and clients and other type of, I mean, a very wide swath. And to a person, they all said, no, that is not a channel fly problem.
Yeah, I mean, and Will was the one that was kind of talking about some of the hotel stuff that he's been doing, and you mentioned that he could tell, and we were expecting the savage beatdown to come in, and he said, look, at the end of I think he called it adequate, and I gave him a little bit of grief for it.
Yeah.
But he said, no, and in all fairness, I was just being a jerk, but he said it wasn't a shot, it was, they didn't do a bad job, but you could tell, and there's plenty of networks all over there that you could look at this, and not just ours and whatever, but it just needed a little bit of tweaking to get it really humming. Mm-hmm. And that's true of any network. In the end of the day, that takes time, that takes training, that takes experience. And some of that, maybe a junior guy that's deploying it doesn't know. He or she is doing their best, and they haven't had the benefit of listening to our fine podcast or coming out to an RCWA boot camp yet or anything like that. And to your point about like the bad fight got toned down, the humility is much better. Yes. And I think certain people, we've got to start bashing. Let's build people up, and that's why we're here. That's why we're here for the podcast. That's why we're here for the boot camp. That's why we're here for WLPC in general and the community. It's so easy to tear people down. Yes, it's so much more important to make sure that people get that knowledge, because they need to know why and how to do it better.
And it's final plug for Todd Cummings and our education group, because I had this conversation a couple weeks ago, and somebody was like, oh, I need this. And I'm like, well, did you go check the YouTube channel? Because we have hundreds of YouTube videos about how to do something. Is it on 6.1?
Maybe not, but it's still
not on 6.1.
It's still applicable, though.
It's very applicable, because let's
some
be honest,
things have changed, but not much.
But not a whole lot.
No.
There's not a whole lot that's changed when it comes to CCI. CCI is still CCI, no matter what it is. So we have all the YouTube videos. We have the RCWA. We also have other types of certification. They're not the high stakes certification of like the RCWA, but we also do have some other certification trainings that we can do. We have, there's all these different things and resources that are available that we need to focus on more to say, hey, it's not channel fly. It's not the channel. It's not channel fly's fault. It's the fact that we need to do a better job of doing those configurations and then checking them later and go, hey, did somebody go change those configurations? Did somebody not know? Why did we change stuff? And to learn and better understand why our networks are doing what they're doing. Because you know what? How many times have we misclicked on something? Two times.
No comment.
More times than I wanted to admit.
No comment. Yeah, no, agreed. It's important.
So we're going to wrap this up, but don't skimp on training. Don't skip on education. The resources are there. Learn and understand, when somebody says, points out and goes, oh, well, I can tell it's channel fly because it's on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. It's not channel fly.
Yeah, that's not. You don't flip on channel fly and all of a sudden channel fly says every channel is in play. You still have to set the parameters. If you set the wrong parameters, it's going to work badly. Well, it's a layer 8 problem at that point. It really is.
Layer 8. So, thanks for joining us, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Jim, for hanging out with me for the better part of almost an hour.
Yep.
Who knows? Maybe I don't know if we're going to be ballsy enough to record another one this week, but who knows? We're here for another couple days.
Hopefully, we're going to run into some people, and I'm really hoping we will record some short ones.
We can definitely record some short ones. So we'll call it a night. It's definitely getting late for us, but we're crazy Ruckus fanboys, as you said. So, all right, everybody, have a great one. Thank you for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode.